Yeah.
Anuradhaji, I will play Advaita music, then you can start after
Okay.
finishing that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Koti, it's live.
Namaste, friends. Welcome to day 2 of the Global Festival of Oneness organized by the Advaita Academy. Today, we're honored to have Swamini Swatma Vidyananda Saraswati with us. Before we start the session, I'd like to say a prayer. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Today's topic is Adhyasa Bhashya, a jewel by Adi Shankara. This will be brought to us by Swamini Swatma Vidyananda Saraswati. I'll give a brief description on Swaminiji. Swaminiji is a renowned Advaita Vedanta scholar and a student of Pujya Shri Dayananda Saraswati. She is sought after for her in-depth training and scholarship in Advaita Vedanta and interreligious engagement. Swaminiji is currently an Acharya with the Arsha Vijnana Gurukulam, which was founded in 2004 and has many centers in the US. Welcome, Swaminiji, and please share with us this wonderful knowledge.
ॐ भद्रं मे अपि वातय मनः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. The topic for today usually takes about 60 hours to complete. There is a text, Adhyasa Bhashya, Bhashya, commentary, Adhyasa. Adhyasa means a kind of a projection, and that's what we will see, what that is all about, a kind of a projection. So this commentary on whatever this projection is a very important topic in our Shastra, in our compendium of Vedanta Shastra, that which tells us that which tells us that you are whole, limitless, and totally free of all the afflictions which come under the name of what is called samsara. And so the Adhyasa Bhashya, this commentary written by Adi Shankara, is enjoys two qualities which are very, very unique to Adi Shankara's writings. One is prasannata. Prasannata means it is exciting, pleasing, comforting to read, to understand, to assimilate, to listen to. So there is prasannata, and then there is a gambhirata, a gambhirya, a kind of a seriousness and profundity. So the word prasannata invokes a kind of a lightness of being and a lightness in the heart. And then the word gambhirya invokes a wisdom that is deep and profound at the same time. How he manages that, it is just a gift of Bhagavan. In fact, he is himself invoked as an avatara of Lord Shiva. And this Adhyasa Bhashya, it is important to know where we find it. It is an introduction to what is called the Brahma Sutrani. Brahma Sutras are 555 aphorisms. The Vedanta Shastra that is said, in small pithy statements, sutras. In fact, the word sutra itself, it is, what constitutes a sutra itself is defined by the sages in the tradition. You can't just write something and then claim it is a sutra. It doesn't become a sutra. Alpaksharam, it should have the most minimal number of words. So a sutra is minimalistic. And then at the same time, minimal number of words means it cannot be something gobbledygook. That is not a sutra. Asandigdham. There should be absolutely no doubt about what it is trying to convey. Saravat. It should be full of meaning. Vishvato mukham. It should be applicable to more than one situation. And then like this, there are all these conditions. What constitutes a sutra? And so the Brahma Sutras are a wonderful, what should I say, a kind of a revision of the study of Vedanta Shastra. That is why it is deferred to till the end. It is not studied in the beginning. Because the student of the Brahma Sutra, one expects the student to know some things about the Upanishad, to know the Vakyas of the Upanishad, which are analyzed through the sutras, not for the sake of academics or scholarship or to show off, I know 5 verses from the Mundaka by heart, how many do you know? It is not a kind of a one-upmanship. All it is a revision for the sake of one's own clarity. To grow in one's own clarity, one revises Vedanta through the study of the Brahma Sutras, where the sentences are analyzed so that one's own doubts, one's own trepidations, hesitations, and vagueness and error are all completely dispelled. The sutras are composed by Lord Vyasa, and Adi Shankara wrote the introduction. In Sanskrit, the word introduction is called Upodghata. Upodghata Bhashyam, the introductory commentary for the Brahma Sutra, is called also Adhyasa Bhashya. Very, very, beautiful. Adhyasa Bhashya. And so that is what we are going to look at. Like I said, it is extremely involved. And so what takes about 60 hours to complete? So basically like 20 days of 3 hours of study every day in the traditional Gurukula style. So now I have been given the task of making short work of it in 60 minutes. So let us see, let us see what comes. Okay. And the what I planned, see, we cannot go line by line, word by word, and also neither is it necessary for right now. What I will plan to do then, therefore, because of the interests of time, and so that one has some kind of a goodie bag of the Adhyasa Bhashya to take with oneself. So what I will do is to first to give a little flair. I may read a little portion of it. I may just sort of, so that you get a little flair for the Sanskrit buffs in the room and for the people who want to know who is this Adi Shankara, what is this Adhyasa Bhashya, what does it sound like, how does it begin. We can just do one or two sentences, we can just read and understand. And then I will just touch upon the main topics and then conclude by talking about why Vedanta Shastra is important to study, why Adhyasa Bhashya is important to study. So basically, we will just have a appetizer today. So this cannot be the main course. And since the appetizer is revealing a taste of the delectable self, so the appetizer is very, very sweet and hopefully enjoyable. So the Adhyasa Bhashya doubles up not only as a very fitting introduction to the Brahma Sutra, but it also is a introduction to Vedanta Shastra in general. In general. Why? Because it is so brilliantly written, so brilliantly worded. Each word is like a flower, and the whole bhashya is like a garland that that reveals the atma, that reveals the truth of the I. Just it is so brilliant. And so therefore this study today, especially since we will not be touching upon the Brahma Sutra at all, and so what we will be doing is instead looking at the Adhyasa Bhashya as an introduction to, as a fitting and a unique introduction to Vedanta Shastra itself. And it starts in a very, a very, very wonderful way. Like I said, let's get a little taste of it. And I'll just read a little bit and then, we can go from there. Yushmat asmat pratyaya gocharayoho विषय विषयिणोः तमः प्रकाशवत् विरुद्धस्वभावयोः इतरेतरभाव अनुपपत्तौ सिद्धायां तद्धर्माणामपि सुतराम् इतरेतरभाव अनुपपत्तिः इत्यतः अस्मत्प्रत्ययगोचरे विषयिणी चिदात्मके युष्मत्प्रत्ययगोचरस्य विषयस्य तद्धर्माणाञ्च अध्यासः तद्विपर्येण विपर्येण विषयिणः तद्धर्माणाञ्च विषयः विषये अध्यासः मिथ्या इति भवितुं युक्तम्. FYI, that was one sentence. Okay. Yeah. So this will give you an understanding of what the whole bhashya is like. It is very, very compactly packed, densely packed, like some kind of, what do we have these days? These nutritious bars, full of 18 grams of protein, 20 grams of protein. Tastes like cardboard most of the time, but never mind. That's not the point. The point is that it is very nutritious. Here, it is nutritious, it is filling, and it is sweet because it eradicates the hunger for knowing the truth of this Jagat, of this universe that constantly confronts us and that which we rub against, whether we like it or not. Every interaction is fraught with some kind of a peril. How is it going to go? What am I, what is that person going to think of me? How am I going to interact with this person? Where will I go? How will I be? Will I be taken care of? All these things. So many things. Oh, they have misunderstood me. Should I apologize? Well, if I apologize, then they may think something else. So better not to apologize. One is a mess. And this whole jagat full of inanimate and animate things, chara charatmakam, moving and non-moving things, confronts the person, the jiva, the individual. And then, of course, if the jagat doesn't disturb, then one is disturbed by other jivas, which is included in the jagat. So other jivas. So one individual, then other individuals, and all these things. And then again there is a polarity rub, and because the individuals are poles apart, and then this is the situation. So jiva jagat bhedaha, the kind of a separation and the division between the jiva, the individual, and the jagat. This is one bheda. And then what? The other bheda, jiva jiva bheda. Difference, division between one jiva and another. And then finally, of course, what else is left? What else is left? You have discussed the jiva, we have discussed the jagat. What else is left? The only thing that is left is the creator of the jagat, which is who? Bhagavan Ishvara. And here too is a bheda, jiva, Ishvara bheda, the division, the alienation between jiva, the individual, and Bhagavan, the source of the universe. And that's why there are so many, each time one gets together with a few people in satsang, what happens? there is a, there is a sad, there are people end up sitting and singing sad songs. Kab, darshan kab doge? Oh, where are you? When are you going to give me darshan? When are you going to take away this pain? And don't play games with me. Don't play hide and seek with me. Show yourself. So this is a sense of alienation, a sense of, feeling of being abandoned by the Lord, by the goddess, where because that which we call the Lord, not locally available, one feels that one is all alone. This is the jiva's predicament. And the Upodghata Bhashya addresses this threefold alienation, this threefold ingredient for pain and sorrow in a very brilliant manner. Yushmad asmat pratyaya gocharayoho vishaya vishayinoho. It starts off as it is a very beautiful way. It says, in this world, Asmin Jagati, in this world, there are only two things. Oh, only two things? Okay, I can handle this. Okay, tell me, what are the two things? One, we will say that those things that are the product of what we can call this cognition. Like, this computer, these glasses, this microphone, this book, this room, this light, this window, this door, this wall, anything that is referred to by the word, by the preposition this. And so, not pronoun, this. So, idam. So, idam pratyaya gocharaha. Pratyaya means cognition. Gochara means that which is a product of this cognition. So this comprises the whole, whatever we can objectify. This sun, this flower, this sky, these 5 elements, everything is this. And then idam shariram, 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, idam shariram kaunteya, even the body is referred to by this cognition, because I can see it, I can touch it, it can be objectified. So we have this cognition, objects of this cognition. This, according to Adi Shankara, comprises one thing in the universe. So all the things in the universe that can be referred to by this, by the word this, comes under the first category. Then what else is there? Then who is left? What is left? The person that is saying this is a product of this cognition is the one that is left. And what shall we call this person? This person is called I. So I am the one that is cognizing everything as products of this cognition. This flower, this table, this chair, this room, this food, this sleep, this body, this mind, etc. So the one who is the cognizer is what? It is called Asmat Pratyaya Gocharaha. Asmat Pratyaya Gocharaha means what? Asmat Pratyaya Gocharaha is that Asmat, I, Pratyaya, cognition, Gocharaha, product of or available for. So only 2 things in the world. This is very easy. See, suddenly Bhashya is very easy. And how has it become easy? Because forget this long paragraph that we read. By the time you finish reading it, without taking a breath, you're turning blue and waiting for the full stop to come. And it looks so difficult. But as I said, there is a kind of a prasannata and a gambhirya. At the same time, it is very, very reflected just in the first 2 words, Yushmat Asmat Pratyaya Gocharayoho, Vishaya Vishayinoho. So, if this much is understood, we can go forward and look at what he is saying about the products of I cognition, and then the products of this cognition and the I, that is the cognizer. What do the 2 have in common? What do both of them have in common? I cognition. And then what? This cognition. What do the 2 have in common? According to Adi Shankara, nothing. Nothing. This cognition and I cognition is like the shadow and the person casting the shadow respectively. So this cognition is like the shadow, and then the person casting the shadow, and the shadow is a mere clone, and it just is at best an imitator, a masquerader, an imposter, if you will. And the shadow example works because it is your own projection, the projection of your form onto the wall or to the ground or wherever, because of the light of the sun. So the shadow is there. Can you make friends with your shadow? Of course, the answer is no, because it is a one-sided affair. The shadow is not going to wish you happy birthday and bring you a present. It's not going to do anything. You cannot have a relationship with a shadow because that shadow is dependent on you. I mean, in the relative example, unless you cast the shadow doesn't have a leg to stand on. And so therefore, you cannot have a relationship with your shadow. And neither do you get concerned that the shadow is going to catch a cold if it falls on the water as you are taking a walk on the river bank. These are all ancient examples, but they are timeless. It's just beautiful. So, when you go for a walk on the river bank or on the ocean, near the ocean, then what happens? then you are looking for a towel because you're worried that the shadow will soon start to sneeze because it will catch the death of a cold. No such thing. No such worries are there because the shadow is not as real as you. Same thing here. So that which is Yushmat Pratyaya, he doesn't use the word discognition. He doesn't use the word idam pratyaya gochara. I am using that word. He has changed the word idam to Yushmat. Yushmat means you. Why? Because he has a very important reason. Because the Upanishad reveals the Atma using the word this. Ayam Atma Brahma in the Mandukya Upanishad Mahavakya, Ayam Atma Brahma. And so therefore he doesn't want to get confused or confuse us. So therefore he says Yushmat Asmat Pratyaya Gocharayoho. But actually it means the same thing. It means exactly the same thing. And this cognition. So the this cognition has at best a shadow-like existence, and then the I cognition is separate from this cognition. I cognition, cognizer, chidatmaka. It is in the form of all knowledge. Because the I, what is this I other than knowledge? So when I say flower is, I cognize the flower. I'm looking at the flower, which is just a manifestation of knowledge. And the flower is a manifestation of knowledge. And what about I? That I, which is the cognizer of the flower, is also, it comes out with a sentence, I know flower. So when I say this is flower, it's the same thing as saying I know flower. The flower is unable to advertise itself. The flower is unable to know itself. The flower, in other words, is neither is it self-conscious, self-evident, self-luminous, and nor is it able to advertise its presence through some other means. It is just an object of cognition, as is everything else in the universe, that is anatma, not I. Object of cognition. Who are you? Subject. So this subject-object differentiation is just so interesting. Here Adi Shankara says that there can never be any source of confusion between the two. You don't go about, for example, you don't go about in the world, in your life saying, I am the hat. You don't say, I am the hat. You don't say, I am the house. You don't say, I am the dog or the cat, pet dog, pet cat. You don't say that. So, in the beginning, right at the outset, Adi Shankara establishes the impossibility of the mix-up between the objects of this cognition, this house, this body, etc., and then the I, which is what? Chidatmaka, which is nitya, which is infinite, which never comes to an end, which is all knowledge, which is able to cognize itself, and everything becomes evident to it. Other things in the Jagat can neither cognize themselves nor do things become evident to them. So you are unlike anything in the universe. And you are the only thing that is self-evident. And so, what is the difference between the objects of this cognition and the objects of I cognition? Adi Shankara gives an analogy. The difference is that they are completely opposed to one another. Like even a lamp and that which it lights up. Tamah prakashavat viruddha svabhavayoho. They are completely opposed to one another. They have nothing in common. In fact, where one is, the other cannot be. So if there is anatma, and if there is atma, there is no such thing called anatma, because that which we call I is actually swallows up all this. Very beautiful. I mean, this takes so long to explain, but he does it in 2 sentences. So in Vedanta 101, we always start with a difference, because the whole world is full of Dvaita, and we use the Dvaita as a pole vault. And then you know how you have these high jumpers, and so they keep running with a big pole, and then they put the pole on the ground and use the pole to vault onto the other side, and then they're not worried about retrieving the pole. Let the pole drop. Same thing here. So in the beginning, we have 2, because everybody sees 2. The vision is divided. Everybody comes from everybody is a dualist, and everybody is afflicted because of the fact that one sees 2. So in the beginning, we take recourse to this duality in the vision, to use it as a pole vault, to use it as a pole to help get to the other side of this understanding, which is the oneness which everyone strives for. How is this done? Very, very simple. First you say, there are only 2 things in this world. Dvau hi padarthau, Atma, Anatma. No. Atma, I, and not I. And the 2 can never get mixed up, because the not I is finite, because anything that you see is drishta nashta svabhavaha, is as good as destroyed. As soon as you look at it, it is gone. Born, gone, born, gone, born, gone. In between born and gone, you have the verb is. Born is gone. Gone, born is. Is born, gone. Gone is born. Doesn't matter how you put it, the effect is the same. So the anatma, anatma is finite. It is, but it is here today, gone tomorrow, whatever. And then the atma, the cognizer of the finite, is infinite. Anatma is, in other words, the technical term, mithya. Mithya doesn't mean illusion or delusion. Mithya simply means that it is dependent on that which is not dependent on anything else. Mithya means it is dependent on Sat. Atma is Sat. Sat means non-negatable. That is the definition of Sat. Abadhitam Sat, non-negatable. So you cannot negate yourself. If I ask you a question, are you here? What will you say? Unless, of course, you are asleep. And Vedanta classes are very conducive, I have heard, for sleep. Okay. So because one is relaxed and sleep naturally comes. So if I were to ask you, are you here? What would you say? If you are not asleep, you would say, yes, I'm here. And supposing if you wanted to play a prank on me, and if you said, you know what, I'm not here, you are still advertising your presence. Like a child hiding behind the curtain and saying, don't look behind the curtain, I'm not hiding here. And that's the first place we will look. So the I can never shut up. Atma is self-evident. And so this is the difference between Atma and Anatma. This is Vedanta 101. And then the 2 have nothing in common, because one is the lighter upper of the other. The other one depends on the I to be lit up in the form of cognition. in the form of hat cognition, ghata, pot cognition, thought cognition, hat cognition, mat cognition, cat cognition. So this is all dependent upon I. Whereas the I cognition is not dependent upon any other source of knowledge. It is swatas siddha, self-evident. This is Vedanta 101. But you know what? We can't leave it there. Then otherwise we'll be stuck with two. That was our problem to begin with. That's what made us want to come, and attend the lectures like this. And now we are stuck with two again. No, the two is swallowed into one. How? By recognizing the dependency of all those things which are products of this cognition on the I. So dependency means the mithyatvam of the objects. That means what? That they are dependent on the I. So if the I were not there, the objects would also not be there. So then if the objects that come and go are simply an extension of the I, then are they really there? They have a very funny, Mithya has a very funny situation here. It is neither, it is something that can neither be affirmed, and this Adi Shankara proceeds to discuss a little later. It can be neither affirmed as existent nor dismissed as non-existent. Like the sage Trishanku, this mithya is in between existence, suspended as it were, in between existence and non-existence. What do you mean? Like, okay, let us take the example, a trusty example of the pot. So we have the pot, correct? And then what happens to this pot? So the pot is nothing but clay. There is no such thing called pot, because you can say it is clay with a certain name and form. So the pot, is the whole of the pot is clay. In fact, there is no such thing called pot. The weight of the pot is the weight of clay. The color of the pot belongs to clay. Everything is, even the smell of the pot belongs to the earth, to clay. So where is pot? It doesn't have an existence outside of clay, independent of clay. In fact, the whole pot is clay. The effect is cause. So the Jagat, as similarly as the effect, is non-separate from its cause, which is Brahman, which is you, which is Atma. That's why the Taittiriya Upanishad very beautifully reveals the Atma, reveals this whole thing. First, it gives the definition of Brahman, and then it says, Tasmadva etasmad atmana akashas sambhutah. Tasmat Brahmanah, from that Brahman, which is the same as this I. This I is the same as Brahman, and from this I was born the space, Akasha. From space was born the air element. And then from the air element was born water. From the water, from the water, the fire. From the fire, the earth. Or the other way around. From the fire, water, earth. And so like this, from the earth, are born trees. Oshadhi. And from the foliage, we get food. From the food, we get this body. And then immediately, so that there is not a separation between the parent, which is the apparent parent, we should say, the apparent parent, which is I, and the things that have come out of this I. There should not be an ashraya, ashrita and ashraya sambandha, a kind of the leaning on this, and then this one is the creator and that one is the created. That creator-created duality also should not be there. That's why the Upanishad says, Tenaisha Purnaha. It is all one. And how is it all one? Because the Akasha is nothing but Atma. Like even the pot is nothing but clay. But you can't, it's all a one-way street in Vedanta. You can't say it the other way around. Pot is clay, no doubt. But my question to you is clay pot? No. Clay can be another pot. Clay can be a diya, a lamp. Clay can be a lid. Clay can be so many things. Clay can be a little lump on the road, on the wayside. So similarly, this I it swallows up all this. Why? Because all this depends on the I to be cognized. The I is independent. So in other words, between the lighter upper of the objects and the objects themselves, there can be no relationship. Any relationship at best is like the relationship between you and your shadow. Etadeva, that's about it. Tamah prakashavat viruddha swabhavayoho. And then he adds one more caveat. He says that the dharmanam api, even from the standpoint of attributes, you cannot make any kind of association, because they have opposite dharmas. First of all, dharma means attributes. The Atma, what dharma does it have? The I, which is blessing this body, mind, sense complex, which is as though indwelling this body, mind, sense complex. What kind of a thing does it have? What kind of attributes? It blesses all names and forms. Likewise, it is blessing this name and this form called so and so, with a particular name, particular height, particular occupation. This I is blessing, and the I is not confined to this particular name or form. So then what form does the I have? No form. No form. That is its dharma. Its dharma is that it is nameless, formless, sentience, which is the only source of all existence and which is limitless. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. Those are not dharmas. Those are not attributes. Those are just indicators, lakshana. And so if this is the truth, then what will this nameless, formless I have in common with something else? Nothing. That which it cognizes. There is not any possibility of samsarga, association. Like, for example, if we say, white cloth, shvetaf pataha, white cloth. So the white and cloth have become one because of association of the whiteness with the cloth. So here you cannot say the same thing about Atma, since Atma is spending too much time. Since I am spending too much time surrounded by Anatma, perhaps I have become that. No possibility at all. Because, there is no possibility of coming together, just like the whiteness and the cloth, white fibers or whatever it is, which come together to weave this cloth. The cloth has become white and cloth have become one. Here, in the nameless, formless I, this is not at all a possibility. So this is a very brilliant introduction to saying that the I is totally free and totally unassociated with anything in the universe that it cognizes. Therefore, there is no mix-up with what it cognizes. Therefore, there cannot be samsara. There cannot be this adhyasa. Adhyasa means this error. Adhi asaha, this projection, it is not even there. But he says, still, despite the fact that they have nothing in common, like the person and their shadow, there is nothing in common. Still, sometimes when one is taken unaware, one can jump at the sight of the shadow. One is frightened by the shadow. Like even this, what is that? In America, in Pennsylvania, they have that groundhog day, where they, this is some kind of a pida they put on the animals. So when some kind of a ferret, or I don't know what it is, but some kind of a thing that lives underground. It looks like a ferret, like a some um, uh, this animal, small furry animal. It is brought out. Its name is Phil. Its name has been Phil for so many so many centuries. It's not the same groundhog. It keeps getting changed. And then this Phil is brought out on February 2nd. And then everybody watches, and all these men in top hats, and then they are all playing trumpets and all kinds of drums and everything. And then the idea is what? you you just look at the will you look at the groundhog to see if it is going to get scared of its shadow, if it's going to look at its shadow and get scared. If it looks at its shadow and gets scared, 6 more weeks of winter. This is actually a very kind of a interesting Vedantic allegory. Winter is ajnanam tamas. And then so if you keep getting scared and getting petrified of anatma, then yes, ajnanam will continue. This is the idea. So even though there is no relationship possible between you and the shadow, this mix up is there. Naisargiko ayam loka vyavaharah, he says. Naisargika ayam. This is natural. This adhyasa is there, and then this keeping this adhyasa front and center, all vyavaharas, all actions take place. Laukika actions, worldly actions, vaidika actions, religious actions, everything. And all the Shastras, the study of the Shastras, which are divided into two, Vidhi, Moksha, Parani, Shastrani. So this Shastra, which are the first portion, addressing the first portion of the Veda, that they have, that do this in order to get what you want. Do Chandi Homa to become wealthy. Do Putra Kameshti Homa in order to have progeny. All these kinds of things. These are all, what should I say? These are all Vidhi Parani, Shastrani. These are the texts which enjoin you to do something in order to gain something. Then there is Moksha Paraha, there is Moksha Param Shastram. There is a Shastra which is totally committed to freedom from doing, freedom from wanting, freedom from being finite, from confusing oneself to be anatma. And that Shastra, the study of that Shastra, is also keeping in view this adhyasa. Everything is dependent upon this adhyasa. This mix up takes place. And then he talks about this mix up in two ways. Very beautiful. First is, and there are many forms of adhyasa, but we don't have the time to go into that. Maybe some other time or place we can look into it. But the main thing is here, the beauty of this discussion is that there is a mutual superimposition. Adhyasa means superimposition. Superimposition of what? That which is cognized, with that which, with the cognizer, the mix up. Two kinds of mix up. The first one, Atmani, in the I, which is free, which is totally unencumbered by samsara, the not I is projected. Atmani, anatma adhyasa, the projection of the not I on the I. And then what? The projection of the not I on the I. What does it mean? So anatma dharma. So the anatma dharma is projected, anatma dharmas are projected on the I. Like badhiroham, I am deaf. I am blind. I am fat. I am thin. I am sad. I am restless. I am angry. So, badhiroham, I am blind, I am deaf, etc. These are all indriya dharmas superimposed upon the Atma. The example of the attributes belonging to the sense organs, indriya means sense organs, superimposed upon the Atma. And then what? Then we have the opposite is also there. And what is the opposite? The body dharma. I am fat, I am thin. And then the manodharma. I am restless because the mind is restless. And then the antahkarana dharma, other, emotions are superimposed on the I, that is free of sadness. I am sad, etc. You see, the I am belongs to the Atma, and that seems to identify wrongly with there is a wrong identification. The I am is Atma, free of everything, and then it goes, and then attaches itself. The notion attaches itself to a certain finitude. Atmani anatma adhyasa. Then the other one is also possible. Anatmani atma adhyasa. In everything that is finite, one tends to superimpose infinitude. Like what? Like you want everything to last forever. The person getting married for the 5th time in the marriage vows, it will be, forever I am going to be true to you. And this is not, of course, being a happy occasion. This is not the time to ask what happened the other 4 times. How come that was not forever? This one, how do you know it is forever? You see? And like this, there are so many examples. We want everything to last. And in India, it takes on certain, there is a certain flair to this. Like, for example, one proud parent tells another parent, my son or daughter, my child got a job. Got a wonderful degree from a prestigious university, and then now has got a job. And then the other parent, of course, will say congratulations, but then we'll have a question. What is the question? Is it permanent? Is it a permanent job? You see, so the permanence, which is the so to speak, which is the possession, which is the dharma of the Atma. So, again, dharma within quotes, because it is not an attribute, but the permanence, which is the nature of the Atma, is superimposed onto the job, onto the house. That's why people say, I don't want a rented house. That's not mine. Ahamidam, mama idam, iti loka vyavaharaha. So this has to be mine. So therefore, I have to buy it. And this is again another big adhyasa, because you don't own the house. The bank is owning the house. That's why the paper of the house is not with you. It is with the bank. That's why you have to keep giving monthly installments. And so like this, the whole, it is just everything is, and the same thing, even after death, one wants to look good. I met one mortician, and this mortician say, who prepares the bodies for burial, etc. in America. And then I said, okay, what is it like? What is your job like? And then he said, oh, people want the impossible. What do you mean? He says, for example, this grandma was already 98 years old. And for 5 years, she had been bedridden. So the whole time she was alive, she was as good as dead. And then now that she has passed away, and while giving me the body to dress and everything, they said, make her look alive. Even after the lady, bless her heart, she lived a full life, 98, and then passed away. And then even then there is no peace. You want her to look, you want that which is already gone to look alive. Because that which is truly alive forever, which is namely you, is not understood. So these are the two kinds of very common, two kinds of adhyasa that are, that are rampant in this universe. And so then, we should shift the discussion a little bit now that the word adhyasa has been understood. And even though it is impossible, it is very much there, is also understood. We will just take a brief look at the definitions of adhyasa given by Adi Shankara. Very beautiful definition. So first one, the first definition he says, paratra avabhasah smriti rupah paratra avabhasah. First definition. Paratra means elsewhere. Elsewhere means what? Where an object, where it is not. Where an object is not, avabhasah, the appearance of the object where it is not. And what form does it take? Smriti rupah, in the form of a memory. So when you see a rope, this is a quintessential Vedanta example. When you see a rope lying on the grass, where in your own, in your own backyard, you see a rope lying in the grass. Maybe some children were playing skipping rope or something, and they just left it like that and then went away. And then you don't know that. You go there and see, and there is a rope lying with something. You can't say rope because it is twilight. You can't see it. So there is something with three bends lying there. And what is the conclusion? Eek, snake. Right? This is an old example, very ancient example. Rajju, sarpa. And then what happens here? Then you have, of course, everybody is carrying a mobile phone, and the mobile phone is not for talking. It's for various other functions. Like it has a flashlight, and everybody will use that, and it tells the time, everything. So then, you press you press the flashlight and shine the light on this snake. And then what happens? Where does the snake go? Does it crawl away? No. It is a mere projection. It is an adhyasta on the rope. The snake is projected on a partially known rope. That is why this projection here in Sanskrit is called aropa, because of the word rope, I suppose, was going to come later. Maybe the Sanskrit sages already knew that. Okay. So this is something which is so fantastic to understand from this simple example. The first definition of adhyasa is already covered. So the remembered snake. Nobody has had wonderful experiences with snake, very few people. So the remembered fear of the snake, the feared snake, which is in the memory bank, is seen, avabhasah, where paratra, where it is not. So it is seen on a rope. What kind of a rope? You cannot say, a totally unknown rope. You cannot say that. Why? Because if it was pitch dark, that's why the example is very specific. For the timing, it is what? Twilight. If it is pitch dark, you cannot say, you cannot see anything. Neither a snake, nor an elephant, nor a garland, nor a stick you can see on the rope. You can't see anything at all. So on an unknown rope, the adhyasa cannot take place. Neither can it take place on a known rope. Supposing it is bright daylight, how on earth are you going to mistake the rope for a snake? Impossible. Impossible. Impossible to mistake the rope for a snake. And so therefore what? So therefore this in-betweenness is very important. It's a partially known rope. Something is asti kaschit, asti kinchit, something is there. But what is its nature? You don't know. And so in the place of that, not knowing that something else from the memory is transposed, is superimposed on that particular thing. Paratra, purvas, purva rupa, smriti rupa, avabhasaha. A very, very, fantastic definition. Fantastic definition. Absolutely wonderful. And so this is the first definition he gives of adhyasa. And what are the examples? The examples are rife. The I is not known fully. Aham asmi, aham, I am is known. That's why if I ask the question, are you here? You say, yes, I am here. And so therefore what? But don't ask the next question. What is the next question? Who are you? What are you? Oh, very, very sorry. I am a samsari. Somewhat sorry, some sorry. And I am subject to samsara. So samsara is nothing but some sorrow or other. Okay. Yeah. So I'm subject to samsara all the time. Glub, glub, glub. I'm drowning. Drowning, present continuous, because if one finishes drowning, then there is no more complaint. It's the constant complaint. And so the I am is evident. I am, the technical word for this truth is called adhisthana. And then the I am an idiot. That idiot, I am plus idiot, that conclusion, that wrong conclusion is seeing the idiocy where it is not. Why do one sees the idiocy? Because smriti rupaha. As a child, everybody called me an idiot. Swami Dayananda ji, my teacher always used to say this. He would say, if you go to a room full of people, like at a wedding or something, and then you say Rama, half the people will turn around and look, because Rama is a common name. And then, half the people may be named Ramachandra, Ramakrishna, something or the other. So Rama you call, half the people will look. And then you say Krishna, the other half will look. And then he would say, extend this experiment a little bit. Say idiot. Then they will all look. They will all say, oh, maybe I am being addressed. So this is the power of the adhyasa. It is so intimate. These wrong conclusions are known more intimately than one's own name even. This is the power of the adhyasa. Very, very, wonderful. And to see how this I am is mistaken, because the I is not known, but it's not fully known. The I is mistaken for the body, the mind, the senses, the sorrows. I is mistaken for the agent of action. I am the doer. I is mistaken for the recipient of the results of action. I am karta, bhokta. I am the knower, pramata. All these things. And all these are very, very finite statuses. And then attaching or identifying with these finite statuses, there is suffering for the I, which is actually free of suffering. This is adhyasa, first definition. Paratra, purva rupa, smriti rupa, avabhasaha, the appearance of something that is not there on something else, because that something else is not completely known. Neither it is fully unknown, like even our rope. The partially known rope becomes attracts adhyasa in the form of a snake. Similarly, the partially known I attracts mistakes, becomes a sitting duck for all kinds of wrong conclusions. This is the first definition. Then the second definition is a very short and a pithy definition. Atasmin tad buddhihi adhyasah. So tasmin tat buddhihi jnanam. So atasmin means in not that. Tasmin in that. Atasmin in not that. Tad buddhihi, that buddhi. Snake buddhi in not snake. Atasmin tad buddhi. This is very beautiful. This again shows the precision and the clarity, and then and this how he hones into the very, very, very pertinent and completely hones into this kind of a laser definition. So the not, not I buddhi, which, in the I buddhi in the not I, this covers the second definition. Amazing. I mean, it is just so beautiful. Then, we equipped with these two, why these two particular definitions? He could have defined it in many, many ways. In fact, we have a whole lot of scholars defining adhyasa, and in five-fold ways, and that is called khyati panchakam, khyati vada, etc. But we need not go into that right now. It's not very pertinent, except to understand that this the thinking about adhyasa was already there. So why does Adi Shankara come up with two more definitions of it? Of this phenomenon of mistaking something for another was already had been studied by philosophers for a very long time, even by the contemporaries of Adi Shankara himself. There is a reason for that. First, in the first definition, he just agrees with all the scholars, and he just culls the similarity and says, look, here are the two things which are common to all the definitions. It is smriti rupaha. First of all, it is a remembered something, and it is seen other than where it is. And then the other definition, he says, atasmin, in not that buddhi, and he hones it in the next definition to bring home the fact that this adhyasa and what we call ajnanam or avidya are one and the same thing. This is where, he just sort of brings it all together, weaves it all together. And this is a very, very important statement, that this, what we call Atma Ajnanam, self ignorance, is nothing but a wrong identification with something or the other that one is not. So error, adhyasa, error, the erroneous projection and the conclusion, erroneous conclusions, is nothing but an offshoot of Atma Ajnanam. Nay, it is a manifestation of Atma Ajnanam. So avidya. So, ajnana nivritya, when the ajnanam is removed, then adhyasa nivritti takes place naturally, automatically. Ajnana nivritya, adhyasa nivrittihi. Definitely. Why? Because the two are one and the same. So the adhyasa is just a byproduct of ajnanam. And so this ajnanam is nothing but that which is experienced through sakshi pratyaksha, through the what is that called, witness perception, as I am sad, etc. Sadness is not objectifiable other than inwardly. As you witness something, you witness some sorrow, and then you come to the conclusion, I am the one that is totally sad. I am in the grip of sorrow. So this is, so this adhyasa is understood through witness perception, and this witness perception makes makes one succumb to the wrong conclusion. The identification with the wrong conclusion is because of avidya, and this avidya or atma ajnanam, one and the same, have to be removed. And then that is the essence of Vedanta Shastra, because only then one is free. One is free to see that one is not afflicted by samsara and its dharmas, its attributes, its finitude. And so if one were to ask, if after studying about adhyasa and removing adhyasa, will I become immortal? Will the body be free of pains and sorrows? The honest answer is no. The body will not be free of pains and sorrows, but you will have a cheerful disposition, because you will not, you will no longer identify with the body. If the body is is in pain, you will take a Tylenol or something. You will take some medicine. If it is it can be removed or comforted, you will do that. Otherwise, you will just be. You will be, it can cause some discomfort. But the pain can bring discomfort, no doubt. You may writhe around, you may just experience the pain, but you will, because of the pain, you will not come onto some wrong conclusions, such as what? Why me? Why did it have to happen to me? What did I do wrong? Why not somebody else? That person, see over there, is not dharmic. I am following dharma. All this drama will not be there. The dropping of the adhyasa is the dropping of all drama, and drama is samsara. And so, what we have to do, we have to drop the D from drama, and all that is there is Rama. Ramante yasmin yoginah, that in whom the yogis revel, which is Atma Ramah, one's own, the truth of one's own self. That is basically the power of this removal of adhyasa, because it frees one from smallness, it frees one from thinking that one is subject to sorrow and fear. And so adhyasa nivritya ajnana nivrittihi. This sounds like a good place to stop so that we can have some question answer, some kind of discussion. I'm eager to hear from you. So I'll say the closing prayers and request somebody to read the questions, or I can read it myself also. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Thank you, Swamini ji. That was really a wonderful goodie bag where you beautifully explained to us in simple terms what adhyasa is and what the removal of adhyasa can do to us. It was really great. There are several questions that have come in, and maybe I'll just read them out to you.
Yeah.
I think one of the common question is, what is the best practice to avoid this wrong view? You see, that's the common question a lot of people are asking. I mean, how does one not have this adhyasa? Of course, you earlier said that it's
Study Vedanta.
Okay.
Study Vedanta. And right now you have a 1-month course automatically that is there, that is being given thanks to Advaita Academy Global Festival of Oneness. And so for 1 month you have day and night lectures by myriad scholars, swamis, pandits, everybody. Enter into, because this is the orientation that I am as good as the body is so ancient. It has become a habit. It's a bad habit. So for the habit to go away, you have to give it a different habit. So the habit has to be slowly worn out. And the best way to wear out this habit is to embrace the study of Advaita Vedanta. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. There's another question which says, is Adhyasa Bhashya enough to establish Brahman, Satya, Jagat, Mithya?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes, it is definitely. That is, in fact, the whole point of Adhyasa Bhashya. Yeah. And then, then the next question is also there. How does this avidya become a positive, entity? It doesn't, it doesn't have to, it is also mithya. You are right. It is also mithya. It is just an entity. We don't have to worry about positive or negative. It has to be removed because it brings out negative effects. That's what it is. So for that same Maya, for Ishvara, it is all knowledge. From the standpoint of the Jiva, it manifests as ignorance. That same Shakti, all knowledge for Ishvara, and it manifests for the Jiva as ignorance. But again, we are saying that we are going beyond this Shakti and this Ishvara Jiva, this so-called divide, by saying that you are one with that Bhagavan. You are one with that Bhagavan once you know that you are not subject to this body mind, the rules of this body mind sense complex. You are not subject to that, and that has to be studied systematically. This is not a one time dip into the Ganga of knowledge. Okay. Yeah.
So there's another question, which is how to know this I-ness, and how should we differentiate this Atma and Anatma in day-to-day life?
Yes, this is a very good, question. How to know the I-ness? I have already talked about. Study Vedanta. Shastram Patha, study Vedanta. And in a systematic way and regularly. And when you study, it wears out the knowledge. And then how to keep the Atma and Anatma separate? I mean, this is very easy, because, this can be a wonderful sadhana. Sadhana means a kind of a very nice practice. And what is the practice here? The practice is, that you look at something and you say, okay, this is not I. And then I have a desire for this. This is not I. So this is, as I said, Vedanta 101. Then the next step is to say, desire is Ishvara. This object is also Ishvara. This body is Ishvara. The ability to think here, the mind, etc. is Ishvara. The one who is looking at this object, Ishvara. The object, Ishvara. Everything is Ishvara. So you Ishvaraize the whole universe. This is step number 2. And in this Ishvarification, there is emotional growth. And the emotional growth leads one to step number 3, where everything is I alone. Yatra yatra mano yati, tatra tatra tava pada pankajam. Wherever the mind goes is, oh Lord, your lotus feet. Wherever the mind goes. Wherever the mind wanders, that is where your lotus feet are. That is how I'm going to look at it. The devotee says. So it's very important to become, re-identify oneself as a devotee, because in that there is a kind of a safety. And because one is not enamored or comes under the spell, one doesn't come under the spell of Anatma. And then that same expression, yatra yatra mano yati, is rendered differently in the next step. Yatra yatra mano yati, tatra tatra samadhayah. Wherever the mind goes, on whatever the mind alights, then immediately there is a subject-object resolution. For the subject-object resolution, you don't have to go to sleep. You can be awake and see the oneness in both. It is a contemplative practice. It's like an open eye meditation. Have fun.
Nishank has a question. I mean, he's commenting, I'm doing a practice where I try to see everything as one. Will this simple psychological practice yield any result?
It's not a psychological practice. It is a fact. It is already one. It's not at all a psychological practice. It's not something that you are trying to make something one when it is not. It's not a trick. You're not tricking your senses, nothing. In fact, if you study physics, especially if you start studying quantum physics, it's all one. Then the observer and observed, there is a great confusion, because when the observer wonders, are you a wave? It waves back, yes, I am a wave. And then, are you a particle? It promptly becomes a particle, which means what? The observer is affecting the experiment. And that can only happen when there is that oneness between the observer and the observed. Even in, there are so many, this is a fact. And this is a fact that is not obvious, because it is not a fact that that can be proven scientifically. It is not subject to scientific proof. Why? Because it is not subject to inference. Okay? It's not subject to inference. And so therefore, it has to be revealed through Vedanta, which is its own means of knowledge. Vedanta is like the light that shines the light on one's adhyasa and removes it. And to be able to see Vedanta is as a light is a great blessing. And that ability, that vision of seeing Vedanta as light is what is the is called Shraddha, Bhakti, a reverential way of being. A reverential and an open mind. So if you are looking at it as a psychological practice, it will not yield any result because you're not believing in it. So this belief pending understanding is called Shraddha, a trust pending understanding. So if you're able to see everything as one, everything as Bhagavan, first, that's why I said first everything as Bhagavan. And then from there, the oneness will naturally come. So that's why we go step by step. Okay. Yeah. Nice question.
Yeah. Deepthi has a question. I mean, she starts with asking that what is the aspect which is partially known?
Yeah.
And then she also says that how to make a differentiation between the partially known and self.
Yeah,
That's
so the same thing. It's a very wonderful question. I have addressed it in the talk, but I can easily reiterate because you have asked an important question. What do you mean by the partially known self? So, for example, when I come to the conclusion, let's say I say I am sad. So that sad is a conclusion. The sad is adhyasa, is a projection. The I am is the self that is understood as self-evident. I am doesn't need another, source of light to illuminate. That is partial. That is what I mean by the partially known, half known I. And as we know, half knowledge is dangerous. So the half known I am is understood. You don't need a certificate of existence. You don't need somebody to tell you you are here. You know that you are here. You know that you exist. But what is the nature of this existence is not known. That it is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, that it is unfettered, limitless, whole, free of even a lesha of sadness and fear, that is not known. And that is known only through the study of Vedanta because the self cannot be objectified. That's what it is. Yeah, very good question.
And then Mahesh Aswani has a question. What is the physics of appearances, object world, and what are the laws of nature?
What is the physics of appearance in the object world, and what are the laws of nature? Laws of nature, just because it is all we say, that we don't call them laws of nature. We say they are the manifestations of Bhagavan, Ishvara. They're not even mandates of the Lord, they're manifestations of the Lord. That's why we can say, Namaste Vayo, Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi. I say Namaste to who? The wind element, the air element. Because you are keeping me alive, you are the best way I can connect to Brahman. You are all pervasive, just like Brahman is all pervasive. And I salute you, I salute Brahman because everything is one. You are the law. You are the creator of the law. You are the recipient of the law. You are the one that is bugged by the law. It's all you. This is we don't call this is laws of Bhagavan. So this is what it is. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by physics of appearance in the object world. If you go by the science, it will say some kind of a, what is that, Big Bang theory, etc., 14 billion years ago. And then time and space was also part of the manifestation. We are not opposed to that at all. We are not opposed to that. However, our tatparya, our commitment is not in trying to find a cosmology. Our commitment is not in trying to find the starting of the universe or how what happened, or our commitment is to reveal the nature of the self as Brahman.
Okay, there's another question which says, is removal of ignorance a one-time work? Is there any need to be in abidance of I after removing ignorance? Or in other words, removal of ignorance and the self-shining forth is concomitant.
What was the third one?
The
Removal of
third one,
ignorance and the self-shining?
force
Oh,
is
fourth, as in
concomitant.
FORTH, fourth. I was thinking fourth. That's why I was not understanding. Okay. So, yeah. So the removal of ignorance is a one-time work. How can it be many-time work? It is just a one-time work. So, like for example, if I show you a flower, I don't happen to have one, but if I showed you a flower and said this is a rose, immediately your rose ignorance, supposing you were let's say, let us just imagine that you had come from some other place where there were no roses at all. This is the first time you're seeing rose. Yeah, so you had rose ignorance, and then I showed you the rose and then said this is rose. So rose ignorance has dropped. And so you don't have to rose every day, come and say, what should I do? What should I do? What is this rose? It is understood, it is dropped. Similarly, you are Satchidanandam Brahma, the ignorance is dropped. But then why do we say we need committed Vedanta study? Because the habitual orientations are too many. The habit pattern of wrong conclusions are too many. So it takes a systematic study to do that. And again, the removal of ignorance is not some kind of a some kind of a some kind of a event that happens to the self called enlightenment, etc. It's not an enlightenment, cannot be an event. The self is the canvas on which all events take place. So how can the self succumb to an event? It cannot, it doesn't have a beginning, which is an event. It doesn't have an end, which is an event. So how can it have something called enlightened? The self is already enlightened. It is naturally free. It is naturally mukta. So therefore, this caveat is important. So the Atma Jnanam is more in the sense of a growing clarity. So is there any need to be in abidance after removing the ignorance? If the removal of the ignorance is sufficient to take care of the sorrow and the fear, not necessary, because Shravanam, listening to the teaching, is the primary way of removing Atma Ajnanam, self-ignorance. If it is not enough, meaning it is enough, but if still one says, I am bugged by doubts, then Mananam, mentation, is advised. Then if one says, I'm bugged by old habits which don't leave me, then abidance in the self, which you call abidance in the self, which is nididhyasanam, is advised. We just, reliving the same kind of, same kind of, what's its name? Same studies, same Shastra, same Mahavakyas, reliving them. Like chewing the cud. The eager cow grazes and then eats all the grass. And then it sits down aram se, nicely in the sun and in the shade, and then brings everything that it has eaten hastily, and then chews and enjoys the wheat grass juice at leisure. So that is what one does. Yeah. If the the habits bug one, okay, old habits.
Okay, I'm joining two questions. Ilam Purnan asks, please enumerate Adhyasa Panchaka where it is available. And then another person is asking how to start studying Vedanta, from which book should we start?
Okay. Yeah, Adhyasa Panchaka, I don't know where it is available. Please Google it. And then there is one wisdom library, all that. Please see. And sanskritdocuments.org. Please look there. So I'm not sure where it is available. Okay. And what was the other one? How to start studying Vedanta? Don't go for books. Don't go for books. This is not something to read, because when you read, your own infrastructure comes in the way. If already one has certain adhyasa conclusions, adhyastha conclusions, I am an idiot, I can't do this, and so what's the big deal? All these notions, they will come in the way even when confronted with Mahavakyas such as Tattvamasi, it will come in the way. Yeah, big deal, Tattvamasi. Okay, next. This is what one will do. So therefore, it has to be studied. The book is just, the book has to be activated into live knowledge, and it has to come from a teacher who is skilled in handling the book. The book is a means of knowledge. So the one who is skilled in handling the means of knowledge is the one who has studied from his teacher, who studied from her teacher, who studied from his teacher, all the way, just like Anuradha ji recited that wonderful shloka, which started with Lord Shiva and all the way to one's own teacher. So this is a parampara. It is a karna parampara. It's a oral knowledge. It has to be listened to. And the more you listen, that ignorance wears its welcome out. That is the idea. So log into classes, log into talks. That is the best way to do it. Okay. Yeah.
And there's one more question which says, femininity is a name and form, but Zoke finds that it's challenging to reconcile with Brahman without invalidating the female experience. Even the scriptures keep talking about sons constantly.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a problem. But then you know what? I have good news for you, Zoki, because you see the Shruti feminine, Upanishad feminine. What more do we want? Vidya feminine. Ah, it's all, in fact, in the Shastra, in Vedanta Shastra, really speaking, if you look at it objectively, there is very little thing masculine. Everything is feminine. And Brahman is neuter. So we cannot even say anything about poor Brahman. So it doesn't need to be, it's beyond gender, okay? But really speaking, everything is feminine. And then if you forget Vedanta and you look at the world, then then people are either hankering after Lakshmi or Saraswati. They're the only two possibilities. They want wealth and then knowledge to enjoy the wealth. Because without knowledge, wealth is not enjoyable at all. And so therefore, this is all feminine, 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 feminine. I'll share a very nice story, small story with you. I was asked I was in the one very big temple in Maryland. I was asked one day to give a tour to some seminary students. They were all from the Christian seminary. This was their first time. They were all studying the Christian philosophies and theologies. And then this was the first time they had come to a Hindu temple, and there were about 65 students. 65, 70 students. And then slowly, I was just what should I say, going and taking them from one shrine to another. It was a huge temple. And then so we stopped at Goddess Lakshmi. And I said, this is Lakshmi, and she's the goddess of abundance, inner and outer abundance, including money, including lofty thinking, etc., etc. And then after that, I went into the Vishnu shrine. And then I was just talking to myself. Nobody was behind me. They were all standing, completely. Lakshmi had held them. Even though they had the first time they had heard of Lakshmi, Lakshmi had completely embraced them. They were standing there in awe and devotion. They had all gone to their knees, and they were, Lakshmi, poor Vishnu had no devotees that day. And so you see, this is the more we look at it. First of all, this gender in the beginning only it matters. After that, it doesn't matter. And so if we can just see the glory of everything. I mean, the Jagat is feminine, everything is feminine. And then that's why the teachers come in all kinds of forms. I mean, even in the Kena Upanishad, the teacher is a female, woman teacher. Haimavati Uma, she is the teacher. She teaches Indra. And then in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the woman is a student. Maitreyi is a student. Also in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Gargi is called Brahmavadini. She is such an expert on Brahma Vidya that the king Janaka asks her to select the scholars for his sabha. So this way, we see, don't get worried about, any the names of men and sons and sages. It's okay. We just, we use our, we use our, what should I say? We use our compassion to allow that to be and to grow out of letting it affect us.
Swamini ji, we would have loved to, would love to listen to you for 60 hours, but then of course we're running out of time.
Absolutely,
So I'll just
yes.
echo what another person said. Koti pranams to you for your grace,
Oh.
time and erudition. We've really learned a lot in this short session. And with this, we come to the end of this session. We have more programs for this entire month. And tomorrow morning, we have a program, which you can just see the